Hello everyone and welcome to the final episode of the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in, and to close out the week in a bang, I wanted to get as many good segments on here for you today. So I'll begin with my bold fantasy predictions, saving a good segment for last, but it's actually going to kick off today's show. Then we get into some other popular segments here on the show. And when I talk about games in both NFL and college football, that will have huge fantasy implications for your respective teams this weekend. And last but not least, since we don't have any shows on the weekend, I want to look ahead to Sunday Night Football, give you a general betting preview, and also some fantasy advice on who to start and who to sit. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. It's a great way to get involved with all of our content, and not just my show. Me and my fellow podcasters greatly appreciate when you guys tune in. But another way you can tune in more directly to this specific show taking place live right here and now is through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to interact with the show. I want to hear all your lovely opinions. You guys have been doing a great job of this ever since this show has gone live, so I'm not that worried. But if you have any burning questions, comments, or concerns, as always, feel free to leave them in the comment section. They're always open, and it just makes this show that much better. But without further ado, let us jump right into our first segment of the day. And the first segment of the day is one that usually comes midweek and comes a little bit later in the show, but I wanted to save the best for last. It's a very popular segment here in the show, and it is my personal bold fantasy predictions. Again, if you would like to leave any comments about these predictions or make your own, I would love to hear them as well. But without further ado, let's talk about the bold fantasy predictions that, remember, I predicted way before I knew the results of the previous week's games. So these could come back to backfire on me, but I'm sticking with them this week. They are bold, and they are predictions that I personally feel could potentially hit this week. So without further ado, let's jump right into them and start off today's show. First one, coming off of a bye week, the Detroit Lions go into Dallas to take on the Dallas Cowboys, and Jared Goff, perhaps coming off his best performance of the season, a vintage Jared Goff performance. When he's on, and he was on against Seattle 2 weeks ago. And I feel he'll be on yet again. Maybe not perfect in terms of going 18 for 18 like he did against Seattle, but he's still going to have a stellar game. I think the Lions have found their groove. They're a tough team to beat no matter how they set up offensively, whether it be through the air or on the ground. So I just feel like now is the time we're going to see Jared Goff become more comfortable in this system. At the start of the season, he was a little bit more erratic, a little bit more tense in the pocket, but in that Seattle game, he seemed to find his confidence, find his footing, and it goes hand in hand with the run game. It coincides with how the running game really takes it to opposition defenses. And so, against a Cowboys front that is very susceptible against the run, you are going to see a lot of up-tempo plays in this Detroit system, this matchup. And a lot of it's going to stem from the running game, but in those opportunities, in those windows where Jared Goff is passing the football, he's going to look very comfortable, going to look very sharp, going to get the ball out quickly, most importantly. And most importantly, I don't think he's going to get any turnovers in this game either. So that's why I think Jared Goff is going to have a repeat performance, rank very high in fantasy, and we're going to see more consistency from here on out from him. That's just my first bold fantasy prediction for this weekend. The second one, not as bold in terms of the overarching sentiment of what I'm saying, but I still feel like it's highly important considering the magnitude of this matchup for this young quarterback, and that is Jaden Daniels facing the Baltimore Ravens. I think that he's still going to be efficient, like I have on my screen here, but they're going to take a tough loss. And this isn't necessarily an indictment of what the Commanders are doing right now. It's just a litmus test that was proved that they might be getting too big for their britches a little bit. They'll still be very competitive in the NFC. But we're talking about perhaps the class of the AFC in the Baltimore Ravens, one of the best teams in the AFC. And I just feel like if it gets into a shootout, there's potential there for Washington to spring the upset. But I trust Lamar Jackson more in his offensive setup than I do Jaden Daniels, because we haven't really seen any kind of potential pratfalls in this offense just yet. But I feel like this is the game where, even though Jaden Daniels is efficient, he just won't be able to keep up with the output of the Baltimore offense. It's through no fault of his own. Just know that. But I feel like at this point in time, their entire squad isn't equipped to go up against an elite team like Baltimore. But Jaden Daniels will continue to prove to us why he's such a valuable fantasy asset and why he has such room to grow. Because this is not necessarily the perfect litmus test for it, being thrown into the fire against perhaps one of, if not the best team in the AFC. But we're going to see the things and details that Jaden Daniels can apply so well to his game in this matchup. And I think they just come up short, but it could be closer than I'm suggesting, because he is that good on the offensive side of the football. It's just the defense I worry about in terms of trying to slow down the Baltimore offense. But I still think Jaden Daniels will be very efficient in this game. And then this is perhaps the biggest surprise prediction of all of mine. Deshaun Watson is going to surprise people this weekend against the Eagles. And what I mean by surprise is he doesn't necessarily have to be a top 5 guy. That's not what I'm saying. But I think what I mean by surprising people is that he's going to play a fairly decent, well-rounded game where he may not have the most impressive stats, may not have the most impressive yardage totals, he may not even throw for multiple numbers of touchdowns. But he's going to look at very least like a competent leader of this Browns offense. And not for nothing, the Eagles defense, for as opportunistic and timely as they have seemed, they've given up the 6th most yards per game in the league. And so I feel like Deshaun, if he finds an early rhythm, if the Browns can somehow get it going on the ground game, I feel like there's a chance that this game could prove to be a settle down moment for Deshaun. I'm not saying that it will continue throughout the season fully and we're going to see a quote-unquote better version of Deshaun than we've seen to this point. All I want him to be is competent. And yes, surprise might just be a strong word here, but I'm trying to say that he doesn't necessarily need to be the superhero Deshaun Watson he was in Houston. He just needs to manage the game, play mistake-free football, and find his opportunities. And he can do that against this Eagles defense, I feel like. So I may have worded this a little bit too sharply, but the sentiment still holds. I'm still saying that Deshaun is going to be someone who is a pleasant surprise. Let's put it that way. Not necessarily going to blow this entire prediction out of proportion and have a 505-yard touchdown day. He's going to just look better than he has up to this point, and it could lead to a win. I don't even say he's going to win here. I just say he's going to play a competent game. And that's perhaps all we should ask of him at this point for this Browns offense. And the last prediction here that I kind of want to get into is the Chargers running all over the Broncos defense. This prediction looks a little bit easier said than done now, actually, because the Broncos at all phases of their defense have massively improved. Kudos to Vance Joseph for making this unit so potent and powerful over the past 2 weeks or so. They look from top to bottom like a defense that can generate takeaways, like a defense that can get after the quarterback, and most importantly, limit the explosive plays that may have hurt them earlier in the season, even in some parts of last season as well. Remember, this is a Broncos defense that just last season gave up 70 points to the Broncos. I mean the Dolphins. So there are kind of holes in this defense and cracks that people can expose. And I feel like out of all the teams in the AFC West, surprisingly outside of the Chiefs, the Chargers are best equipped to attack that. And so J.K. Dobbins, like I mentioned in my running back segment earlier in the week, is going to be a force in this game. Now, the question here about the Chargers is, well, how long can they sustain this against superior competition? Well, that will remain to be seen, because I don't really trust that Jim Harbaugh's philosophy will have staying power with this team just yet, because it is such a physical brand of football, and it is high risk, high reward. You don't necessarily see a lot of teams play this style, but if you can play it effectively, you can spring an upset or two. You can grind the game to a halt and kind of use it to your advantage. But this is the game where I feel like the Chargers offense has an ability to go mano-a-mano with a very physical defense and just out-physical them. Because I just think J.K. Dobbins, outside of Baltimore, found a lot of value in a much more physical running back room. Because in Baltimore, he was more asked to supplement what Lamar Jackson did best. Worry about speed a lot more. This system worries more about getting chunky yardage, keeping your offense on the field, and most importantly, sucking the momentum away from opposing offenses. And so that's what I feel like the Chargers are going to do in this game. It's going to be a tough task because this perhaps is the toughest defense they've faced to date. But I still think they will have the upper hand in this matchup. But let me know what you think in the comments, because all of these predictions, some are wackier than the others. Some are more safe than others. But overall, these are just my personal ones that I feel like would hit. But let me know what you think in the comments. But other than that, on the other side of this short break, we are going to be talking about the big games in the NFL this weekend that will have the hugest fantasy implications for your squad. Should be a good one. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to contribute and interact with the show directly while it is live, you can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Leave a comment in my comment section. Click the $ if you do wish to donate, and I will be glad to read your comments aloud, read your own opinions aloud on my live show. They're a great way to interact with me, my fellow podcasters as well. Go check out what they're doing. They are great in their own right, but it just ultimately makes the show so much smoother, so much better, and I appreciate every single comment that you guys have talked about to date on this show. Without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today, and let's talk about one of the better segments on the show. I always love saving this for the end of the week. The NFL and college football games that will have the hugest fantasy implications, and we start off in the NFL. There are 3 games that caught my attention in week 6 of the NFL season that I feel project to have some big fantasy implications. Both or two of them are divisional games. So you can expect them to be very feisty. And one of them is just a good old-fashioned QB battle. And we talked about it briefly in the first segment, but overall, all three of these games, I feel like, have players that can be X factors in your fantasy teams this week. And hopefully this segment will also help you make those important fantasy decisions to help bolster your team. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's second segment. Starting off with the first game, we talked about this a little bit in our first segment and throughout the week as well, but it's perhaps the best fantasy game of the weekend. Commanders versus Ravens. It's a fantastically fascinating game in terms of fantasy implications because of the two quarterbacks and how they operate their offenses. On the Washington side of things, Jaden Daniels is in a system with Cliff Kingsbury that is not often seen in the NFL. It's a more college-style offense where he can make quick decisions based off what he sees in the defenses. And thus it takes a lot of pressure off himself, and thus he feels like he can generate more big plays, and he feels a lot more confident in this system with kind of free reign over what he can do. Kudos to Cliff Kingsbury for allowing this freedom in this offense, because it's very tough to do that with a rookie quarterback. But we're seeing Jaden Daniels handle this offense with poise, with competence, with confidence, and most importantly with ease. He's making it look easy to run this offense. And not for nothing, it is in many ways a simplified offense so that he doesn't necessarily have too much pressure on him. But the fact that he's making his own decisions, he's seeing things on the defensive side, I feel like he's for real this season. That being said, on the Ravens side of things, they're going to have to worry about slowing down Lamar and co. because this offense is just as good as what Washington brings to the table. You have Lamar now with Derrick Henry in the backfield, and this completely changes the dynamic of when Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins were still there. Because when Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins were still there, this team was just too concerned, much like what the Dolphins are seeing now with speed. When you have too much speed, chances are you don't necessarily know how to utilize it best. We saw it early in Lamar Jackson's career. We're now seeing it a little bit in Miami. But now that you have a guy in Derrick Henry who can do a little bit of both, kill you with speed and with physicality, it just makes the Ravens that much harder to defend. And the Commanders' defense, not for nothing, has felt like at times it's been improving, but it's still far from where it needs to be on the offensive level and to play a well-rounded game of football where both the offense and defense really complement each other. And it's definitely not going to happen against this Ravens team. In terms of fantasy implications, look for big games from Daniels and Lamar at the QB positions. That's a non-starter. Both of these guys feel like QB1 immediate starts for this week. In terms of their offenses, I feel like Terry McLaurin is someone to watch. He's going to have a tough matchup against Marlon Humphrey, but he's getting vertical, he's stretching the field, proving to be a pesky receiver for opposing defenses and corners to handle. On the Ravens side of things, I still like Isaiah Likely a lot as perhaps that number one, receiver in this whole offense, even though he's a tight end. Because I feel like Lamar is developing a rapport with him. Zay Flowers has had decent games here and there, but he's not had a breakout game just yet for this Ravens offense. So I just feel like Isaiah Likely is the way to go if you want a competent skill position player from this Ravens offense in your fantasy squad. But overall, it should be an exciting game. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to these two MVP caliber QBs duking it out. Let's transition to the next game. Another divisional game. Much like what we had last week when we had a lot of divisional games with huge fantasy implications. This one, maybe not as much as, now that we know about Derek Carr, but I still feel like there's value in the Saints team nonetheless. It's Bucs Saints I'm talking about here. Another NFC South battle. And the thing that I love about fantasy in the NFC South is that you can just get as weird and wacky as you want if you have a load of NFC South players in your fantasy squad. Because everyone is so balanced, the parity is crazy. And in terms of both of these teams, I kind of feel like you have a lot of high-end talent that you can trust for your fantasy squad. On the Bucs side of things, we already know. When Baker, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin are all clicking, this is a very hard offense to stop. I'm a little bit worried about the defensive side of things, but the offense is going to be humming and firing on all cylinders in this game. For the Saints, it gets a little bit weird now that Derek Carr is going to miss a couple of games, but I do like both of their backups. In the brief time we saw Jake Haener, he looked competent enough. He's not going to start, though. It's going to be Spencer Rattler, who was actually seen as a first-round talent, early in his college career. But as he had a lot of transfers throughout his college career, his stock kind of plummeted, and now he's backing up Derek Carr. But now is his opportunity, stepping onto the field against a divisional opponent to prove himself and prove that he can operate this offense at a high level. And perhaps, if Derek Carr's future is uncertain in New Orleans, could take over that number one QB role. And so, on that side of the football for the Saints, I'm not looking for a lot of explosiveness, so maybe Rashid Shaheed would be someone you should shy away from. But I still like Alvin Kamara a lot in this game. He's a security blanket for this young guy. And I still think that when all is said and done, Chris Olave, that last performance was not indicative of what he can really do, and he's going to have another good performance in this game. But overall, just acknowledging the fact that it's an NFC South game should let you know that there's going to be a lot of importance. As my man, Andre, is in the chat. Welcome to the show, my man. I feel like this Bucs Saints game is a game that ultimately is a no-brainer to a lot of fantasy players, because you have two solid receivers on both sides of the ball on both teams, and you have offensive game plans that allow for these offenses to really let loose and play free-flowing football. And so I'm really excited about this game, even with Spencer Rattler now in it. As Andre said, bro, I had a trade in the works for Breece Hall, giving Mason and Downs. The injury happens. Yeah, I feel like Mason's stock was going to plummet at some point, and then, of course, with all the injuries, especially for the 49ers going down like that, it's kind of weird to watch, because he had a little bit of a short leash because of the fact that it sounds like McCaffrey's coming back maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks from now, but we'll see. So I feel like, if you just put him on the waiver wire, it will be okay. It's no big sweat, but it is kind of weird to see how Jordan Mason could have been a very valuable trade asset. And as he also says, I'm even willing to take a chance on ETN giving Mason, and he does think CMC is coming back, much like myself. But yeah, if you can find a different trade package, I feel like it could work out for you in the end. But I feel like Mason at this point is just a waiver wire kind of player right now. I don't see any universe where he can be traded, because his touches are going to plummet soon. And so he's just going to be someone who's going to lose value by the second. So I wouldn't worry about trading him. But you do want to supplement your running back room, I understand that. So maybe finding a different trade package. As he does say, should I trade Garrett Wilson, I believe, and Jordan Mason for Justin Jefferson? That's a huge swing for the fences, but I like it. I really like 2-for-1 deals where you're trading away multiple players and just receiving one, but you got to do it for a guy like Jefferson. I know it's a big risk, as he says, giving up a first-round player and Jordan Mason for Justin Jefferson, but I feel like at this point in the season, we now know who both Wilson and Mason are at this point. Wilson might not get going again in that Jets offense, And Mason now injured. Even now injured, not going to come back and get many touches once he comes back. So you gotta make this trade because yes, it's tough to give up a first round player, but you gotta do it for Justin Jefferson, who's gonna be a game changer in the immediate future, rather than someone who struggled to start the year and a now injured player. So I would definitely go through with this trade. But the last game I want to talk about here before we go take a quick break is the Lions-Cowboys, as he says, I'll then have Jefferson and Chase. Well, it works out perfectly then in the end. Good luck if that trade goes through for you because your team will be looking pretty stacked going forward. But the Lions and Cowboys is an interesting game here to conclude this segment because I feel like both of these teams are spiraling in different directions, but I still feel like there's a little bit of value to be had in the Cowboys in terms of fantasy. Because you still got to consider the fact that, yes, Dak and CD have a good connection. And occasionally, guys like Dowdle, guys like Ferguson, even a guy like Jalen Tolbert who's projecting to have a breakout season. As Andre also says, do you think it'll get vetoed? I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of a weird trade, but at this point, you got to at least test the waters because just to be safe, I'm going to send Mason, Wilson, and Downs. I feel like no matter who you send, I feel like at least the person who you're trading with will consider it because it's silly not to. But I still feel like to kind of make it safe, maybe throw in Downs, but I still think it would go through if it's just Mason and Wilson. But we do want to talk a little bit more about Lions-Cowboys. I think that Jared Goff and Amon-Ra are perhaps the two biggest fantasy threats in this game, but I also really love Laporta and actually the Lions' defense in this game. I feel like they're well equipped to handle what Dak and CD can do, and if you just make them a one-trick pony, they have a lot of value. On the Cowboys side of things, Jalen Tolbert is a deep sleeper for this game and for your fantasy league in general, and I actually really like the upside of what Jake Ferguson can bring to the table. I've been hoping that he's been going to get going for many weeks now, but I still feel like now is the time for him to truly be the breakout star we thought he could be. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this second segment. Let me know what you think in the comments about it. Coming up next, we transition a little bit from NFL to college football very briefly, talking about the same topic, big games with big fantasy implications. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And a transition a little bit for our third segment, we're going to take a little respite from talking about the NFL. Let's get into some college football, shall we? A fun week of games coming up tomorrow with a lot of different conference battles that hold a lot of weight, but especially in fantasy terms, if you are a fantasy college football player, whoever's watching out there, good luck to you in your college fantasy football exploits. As Andre said, Jefferson is bye week free too after that trade, so that makes it even more appealing to go out and do this trade, because if he's on a bye week, then this person may not even be thinking about them clearly enough to really see. As Andre also says, Sco Ducks. Shout out to the Oregon Ducks. We're going to talk about them for a little bit. But we first want to talk about some more games that could be even more appealing as well before we get into that big Big Ten matchup, saving the best for last for you, my man Andre. Let's talk about my team a little bit first, actually. Texas going up against Oklahoma in the first SEC edition of the Red River rivalry. And the big question about this game isn't necessarily going to be about the pressure on Oklahoma. I feel like more pressure is going to be on, as Andre emphasizes, with some duck emojis. I shout out the Oregon Ducks. I love that team, and I think they're going to have a decent shot against Ohio State. But for the time being, talk about Texas a little bit. I think the big theme here is going to be whether the Quinn we know and love, as myself being a Texas fan, is going to show up in this game. Because this is perhaps the toughest defense he might face all year. I know they face the Georgia and Texas A&M defenses and some more opportunistic SEC defenses. But to date, this will be the toughest, especially coming off that abdominal strain. Now, for Oklahoma, I think a lot of the fantasy upside in this game is that Michael Hawkins is a very unusual player. He has not played in a game at this level. He's only played one game so far in his college career against Auburn. And he's not played in a game as momentous as this, on a stage as big as this. But the positives we've seen from him show perhaps the way they can attack this Texas defense. Because if we look through the years in Red River rivalries, the way you can beat Texas if you're Oklahoma is through duality. As Andre said, the Jaden Blue show this weekend. I really hope he has a big part to play in this game. I love the kid. He's not necessarily the most explosive back we've ever had, but he gets the job done. Shout out to him. I think he's going to have a decent fantasy day. Maybe not break the 100-yard threshold, but I'd love to see him get in the end zone this weekend. And I really think it's going to settle Quinn down, if he looks a little bit erratic to start this game against this very tough defense. But on the Oklahoma side of things, I think if they can move Michael Hawkins Jr. around in the pocket, get him out of structure, that will keep the Texas defense honest and on their toes, and perhaps we get to see a big play. Yes, they're very banged up in the receiving corps. They don't have Deion Burks, their top receiver. But I still think that Michael Hawkins Jr. can be dynamic enough to unsettle perhaps the weakest part of this Texas team, which is their defense, especially that secondary. They haven't really been tested like this so far, this defense. But the ultimate theme is seeing whether or not Quinn Ewers can stay in the rhythm we saw early in the season after coming off this injury. If so, then I feel like this game could be a blow. If not, then maybe Michael Hawkins has a big play or two to keep this thing closer than it is. But it should be a good one in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. But coming up next, a huge fantasy game with two of the most exciting players in all of college football. Kansas State, Colorado, and as you can see on my screen, that means Avery Johnson against Travis Hunter. Now, a lot of you might be more unfamiliar with Avery Johnson. I think that, he's someone who needs to be seen in the national spotlight to really get his true talent. But he is a sight to watch, man. I saw him a little bit in that fourth quarter against Arizona. He can make plays with his arm. He can make plays with his legs. He can really affect opposing defenses. And not for nothing, as much as Colorado's defense has steadily improved throughout the year, I still think that they have not faced a guy like Avery Johnson just yet. And he's going to have a positive effect in this game, especially if DJ Giddens can get going in the run game as well. Nice little supplement there for Avery Johnson. On the Colorado side of things, I think that there's a lot of fantasy upside in this team. This might be the most underrated receiver core outside of Travis Hunter in the entire nation as well. If you take away Travis Hunter, this receiving core is still very skilled. You still have guys like Jimmy Horn, Will Shepard, the Vanderbilt transfer, looks incredible. You still have a lot of talent there. Wester as well, the guy who caught that Hail Mary against Baylor. I still feel, though, that Travis Hunter is going to get a lot of attention on both sides of the ball. And we're going to see if, he has a Heisman moment in him, because this is perhaps the best quarterback he'll face all year. This is perhaps most opportunistic defense he'll face all year. So if he has a solid two-way game, he could see his stock plummet or rise in the Heisman race, because it's now a two-horse race, in my opinion, between him and Ginty from Boise State. And so he just has to have solid games against these kind of opponents to stay in this race, and I think he'll have it. But look out for Avery Johnson as well in this game, and DJ Giddens as well is my X factor for that Kansas State offense as well. Then the next game, going over to the Big Ten a little bit. Not just yet, Andre. I promise we're going to talk about your Ducks in a hot minute. But Penn State and USC. The thing about the Big Ten that's been very interesting, and with a lot of conferences outside of perhaps the SEC and Big 12 for that matter, is travel. Penn State's going to have to travel across the country to a USC team that, yes, has bad losses on their resume. They just lost to Minnesota, of all teams, in the Big Ten. But this is still a team that has shown signs of subtle improvement in areas where they've looked atrocious over the past years of the Lincoln Riley era. Especially on the defensive side of the ball, kudos to DeAnton Lynn coming over from UCLA and revamping that defensive side of the ball. But I think the fantasy impact of this game comes from the Penn State offense combined with the opportunities of the USC offense as well. And not for nothing, this game is going to have a lot of explosive plays. I feel like Miller Moss is going to be timely. He's a solid pocket passer, and a lot of his weapons are stepping up. I love Jacoby Lane. I love, Zachariah Brand still being there. If he can get going in the passing game, then this USC offense can get things going. The Penn State offense, they're all about the explosive play. And against a very tough physical USC defense, can Drew Aller stay in rhythm? Can he hit all his different weapons? Can he get his young talent going in the game? And then can Nicholas Singleton and Kayshawn Allen be your tough physical closers? And that's the big question that I have about this game. I feel like, though, travel is also the name of the game. Will Penn State look a little bit fatigued in this contest? Will USC be able to take advantage of it? We'll see unsung heroes step up for them on both sides of the football. So that's the reason why I also said it's a potential trap game for this offense. Because when you're on your side of the coast, let's just say, and you're not traveling that often and you're really staying at home for the most part, like Penn State has over the past couple of weeks, you really don't let that sink in. You really don't let that translate to how your whole physical self reacts. And now you're traveling all the way across the country to face USC. It's going to take a toll. And it's going to be up to Drew Aller and company to kind of weather that early storm. Because they're going to look shaky to start the game. But if they can settle in, a lot of big plays will happen for this offense, I think. And I feel like it's going to come from a lot of different players. So keep your eyes peeled for this game. But finally, Andre, it is the game of the week in the Big Ten. Unfortunately, to any Penn State or USC fans, this game gets second billing for Ohio State and Oregon. This is perhaps the biggest game the Big Ten could ever hope for after, Oregon comes over. So what I'm really looking for is whether or not, Oregon can prove they belong. Because as much as their 5-0 start has been pretty rocky, pretty topsy-turvy, this is a game where all those worries can subside if you're an Oregon fan. Just beat Ohio State, and your kind of early season worries will just go away. Even if you lose them again in the Big Ten championship game, you still own this win forever in your first year in the Big Ten. And I think they can pull it off. This Oregon defense can get pressure. I like Jordan Birch up front. And not for nothing, yes, you kind of worry about what Dylan Gabriel's turnovers will look like, but he's still a competent quarterback. And they brought him in for a game like this on the biggest stage. They could have picked any transfer quarterback, but the reason they picked Dylan Gabriel is because of his experience in games like this. They have perhaps one of, if not the most talented wide receiver corps in terms of depth of anyone in the Big Ten and in the nation. I love Tess Johnson. If they can get Evan Stewart going in this game, that's even better. But overall, they will have their opportunities in this game. But on the Ohio State side of the football, we're finally going to get to know a lot about how Will Howard can affect this team. Because this is the biggest test. And if Dylan Gabriel outshines him, Ohio State fans will be absolutely livid with how they perform in the recruiting trail. They could have had Dylan Gabriel themselves. They went for Will Howard. And I love Will Howard, but I don't think, he's the biggest star they could have gotten out of all the QBs in the transfer portal. So this is going to be a proving ground for Will Howard. Can he outperform a guy who I just think is the more appealing of the two quarterbacks? This has always been my issue with Will Howard. Going up against big teams, can he weather the storm? Because all around him, the talent is there. Abuka, Judkins, Henderson, Smith, perhaps the best freshman wide receiver of all of them. But he has to prove that he can run the offense because he's the engine driving this offense. If he can't, then perhaps we think too much of Ohio State. But it's all going to come down to both of those QBs. And right now, as funny as it is to say, Dylan Gabriel has already proven he can have big moments. Now we have to see if Will Howard can as well. Let me know what you think in the comments, because all of these games are going to be super entertaining. Perhaps the best week of the college football season is Week 7, without a doubt. But coming up next, we transition back to the NFL, specifically to Sunday night, where a contest between the Bengals and Giants will go down. We'll be right back after this short break to start talking about that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. We are in the home stretch of the show today, and the week, for that matter. But before we get on to the weekend and enjoying all of our football, I do want to foreshadow and look ahead to Sunday Night Football, because we rarely get a chance to talk about this. We don't have a weekend show, so why not talk about Sunday Night Football a little bit in advance? And it should be a very interesting matchup. Not the best we could possibly have, but there are dynamics within it that really are intriguing and appealing if you're just a regular football fan or a fantasy football player. But especially if you're a betting fan, and that's what we're going to be talking about for our fourth segment of the day. And the game taking place is between the Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Giants, an inter-conference matchup. Cincinnati, 3.5-point favorites at home, I believe. Over under 47.5. New York Giants money line is plus 160. Cincy's is minus 190. As Andre says, it's the breakout game for Brees. I think you have the wrong game. This is the Sunday night game, but let's talk a little bit about the Monday night game, because you did bring up Brees Hall. I think that this could be an interesting game for Brees going up against the Bills. I think that, it's going to depend on how this new look offense really plays. But if, the Jets really want to get this offense firing on all cylinders, they're going to have to incorporate Brees Hall. Without a question. It can't just be all about the Rodgers show. You're going to have to include guys like Brees, guys like Garrett Wilson. And so I can't ignore the fact that, yes, you can change all the personnel you want, but if there's no change in the field, then I can't really say that any one of those players that I just mentioned is going to have a breakout game. But you bring up a good point. Now is the time for the Jets to try new things. Maybe Aaron Rodgers might not like it, as Andre says, oh shoot, got them mixed up. No worries, my man. But it's an interesting question to at least bring up, right? Because we've worried about Brees Hall a lot as fantasy managers. But this game, I certainly feel like you have to take your chances with him. But let's get back to the actual Sunday night football game between the Bengals and the other New York team, the New York Giants. Now, the betting odds are in your favor in this game. As Andre said, at least they promoted Hackett. He is horrible. I completely agree. He has no business having any coaching job in the NFL anymore. I don't care what Rodgers likes about him. As we said, I had to suffer watching him call plays in Green Bay for years. And I feel you on that one. But he has no business no matter what Aaron Rodgers thinks of him. It's not about buddy-buddy relationships. It's about winning football games. So, as Andre is now talking about the real Sunday game, Joe Burrow in a must-win game. Bro, I'm not going to lie, this feels like a trap game. I like the Giants in this spot. I kind of agree with you. I feel like this is going to be a close game. And he says Giants money line as well. And I would take that too. But it just does feel like a trap game, right? Because the Bengals are coming off two very emotional games. They got their first win against the Carolina Panthers team that felt rejuvenated, what with benching Bryce Young and bringing in Andy Dalton. But it was not an impressive win in the slightest because we still don't know what to think of the Panthers. Then they play at home to Baltimore, and they look like they're about to win the game, but let it slip. And so I feel like this Bengals team just can't get out of their own heads, can't get out of their own ways. And as much as Joe Burrow has been playing some great football over the past couple of weeks, he's been connecting with both Chase and Higgins, really incorporating a lot of different players in this offense. They're moving the football effectively. Their defense is the real problem. This is legitimately the worst defense in the NFL right now. I can think of no other defense, maybe outside of my Seattle Seahawks, but that's a different story, that has looked this bad over such an extended period of time. And it's not just against, teams that you would think can look superior to them on a football field. It's against inferior competition as well. The Panthers stuck around in that game. So, if you don't fix your defense, then that spells trouble. So, that's all I have to say. On the Giants side of things, a lot of positives to take away from that win against Seattle that I don't necessarily want to talk about as a Seattle fan, but we have to. You established the run game. You were dominant in that game. And Daniel Jones looked super confident as well. Daniel Jones, as much as it's tough to concede, played an excellent game against us. So congratulations to Daniel Jones. Hope it carries over if you're a Giants fan out there. But, man, that's such a painful game to talk about. But I digress because we have to talk about this one. And in this game, I just feel like Daniel Jones can do a lot of the same things that he did against Seattle and be fine. A lot of people's complaints about the Giants have been that they don't seem to have a set game script for Daniel Jones, so he looks erratic different weeks. So if they can play the same way that they did against Seattle, run the ball very physically, get Daniel Jones comfortable passing plays, where the defense suddenly has to respect both, and you have something going. You have a rhythm going if you're the Giants offense. And so, in this game, the key thing for the Giants to do is just not, get ahead of themselves, and for Daniel Jones to stay comfortable and poised in this game. Because when he is, he can play pretty well. And yes, it's not the best defense that he's going up against, but you got to take your advantages when they come. And so, look for Daniel Jones to really shine in this game. And I feel like even without Malik Neighbors, the Giants shouldn't be taking on the mentality of, oh, woe is me, because they played a great game without him. You have the weapons there. You just have to utilize them to the best of their abilities. And so, thinking about how this game can play out, I just feel like the Giants will have more opportunities, be more opportunistic on the offensive side of the football, and thus potentially win this game, like Andre said. Whereas the Bengals side of things, if you're just getting offensive production and nothing from your defense, I think that you don't want to get into a shootout if you're the Bengals. You want to keep this as low damage control as possible, because if you allow the Giants to dictate the time of possession, your offense won't even be on the field. And so it's going to be all about opportunity for the Bengals. You have to retain the football, score points, and most importantly, try and limit what the Giants can do. But the Giants now feel like they can have a game plan against weaker defenses. So your job as the Cincinnati Bengals offensively is to put up points and put them up in a hurry, because there's no saying your defense will hold any lead you give it. And so if I'm Joe Burrow, I have to think, I'm scoring on every drive. I don't care what my defense does. We've got to match them at the very least. If you do build a big lead, I feel like you can't rest on your laurels, because the Giants can be one play away from getting back into it. So if you are the Cincinnati Bengals, especially Joe Burrow, Zach Taylor, figuring out this game plan, you have to be in attack mode every single time. Because if you are, maybe the Giants don't have a chance to outscore you. But just know that your defense also might struggle in this game. So that's the reason why I'm kind of tied up a little bit in terms of how I would bet in this game. But I feel like it's tough to feel good wholeheartedly about the Bengals in this game, because as much as you love the offense, as much as this offense can put up points with anybody, that defense will just let it down. And so that's why I feel like I'm leaning, much like Andre, to the Giants side of things. And I feel like it's going to be close. I'm not certain the Giants can cover the spread. I think that it could be a 1-2 point game at the end of it. But I do feel like the Giants have the better chance to win. I feel like they have the ability on the offense side of the ball to make their game plan a possession game. And in turn, it will affect the rhythm of the Bengals offense as well. So it's tough to kind of go against that Bengals offense, but I just feel like for as long as they're off the field, there's no way they can really harm the Giants. Not for nothing, the Giants' defense was also impressive against that Seattle offense. So I kind of feel like a couple of odds are stacked against, and too many for the Bengals to overcome in this game. Let me know what you think in the comments, because we're still going to talk about this game to close out today's show, more specifically in the fantasy side of things, as I talk about who to start and who to sit for this game. We'll be right back to close out the show after this short break. Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day and the week here on the show, and it's going to follow the Sunday Night Football theme. Going to give you more so fantasy advice for this closing segment on who to start and who to sit in this game. And for both teams, I feel like the path is clear in terms of managing this game in terms of fantasy. Because you know what the Bengals bring to the table, and you kind of feel like you know what the Giants bring to the table. They're two very different teams with two very different styles, but in terms of determining who to start and who to sit in fantasy, it becomes that much easier because you know their respective styles. Without further ado, let's jump into why this game seems so easy. Let's start off with the Bengals side of things. Because the obvious starts are Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I feel like there's no other kind of duo. As Anna said, I need a big game from Higgins this week. The guy was playing, picked Lockett off of waivers and got 16 points from him. I feel like the thing with Higgins is that a lot of the Bengals offense is going to come down to route structure, if you get what I mean. I feel like Jamar Chase wants to get more vertical, and T. Higgins is the more intelligent in terms of his route running. So it's going to depend on how this game plan goes, because if the Bengals are playing from behind, they might want to take a little bit more of the deep shot, and that would lean towards Chase's style of play. However, if you know the Bengals want to play a little bit of the possession game, as Anders says, he's been getting a lot of targets his first few games back, and I agree with that. But this game could be a different thing entirely, because I feel like the Giants' defense is going to be aggressive in this game too. And that's going to be difficult. And Deonte Banks, not for nothing, has had one of the toughest slates of any cornerback, and he's held up admirably. So who knows how this game is going to go. What I feel like the best way could see Higgins potentially be the better of the two in terms of targets. Because if you want to retain the football, you can utilize T. Higgins in longer downs, kind of scheming him open, and he's going to get a lot of targets that way as well. You can't just always take the deep shot with Chase, and I think that you're smart to acknowledge that. So I feel like this specific game is going to be all about how the Bengals attack the Giants and how it will affect the game flow. Because early lead, maybe you're going to see a little bit more Higgins. He also asks, would you start Swift or Brian Robinson this week? Interesting question. I feel like the Jags-Bears game could also be a trap game for the Bears, but the Commanders-Ravens game is a tougher matchup. So I begrudgingly will say Swift, just because A, he's in my personal fantasy squad and I want him to do well. But B, I just feel like the Bears can utilize Swift a little bit more in that game. Whereas I don't know how effective Brian Robinson will look, even though I love him and love what he's done with the Commanders' run game this year. So I would begrudgingly start Swift, even though it does feel like a big trap game for Chicago going into Jacksonville. Going back to the start-sit for Sunday Night Football, speaking of running backs, I feel like that anyone that has Zach Moss might want to bench him for this game. It's not looking like the best game for running backs. And I feel like this game could look very similar offensively for the Bengals for what Seattle looked like against the Giants, in that you kind of don't have many options in the run game because their run defense is so stifling that you're going to see a lot of either short to intermediate routes run by your receivers or just try and get vertical passes. In that way, that's where I worry that the roles of certain players for the Bengals in terms of fantasy could get reversed. But for now, I'm comfortable to say Zach Moss is going to be the one who should be benched for the Bengals offense in your fantasy squad. Because if anything, I actually like Chase Brown a little bit better if that's the route the Bengals want to go. If you run the football, you need some explosiveness to kind of balance out what you run on offense. So that's the reason why I think Zach Moss's value as a fantasy asset is plummeting as well. It's not just about, how the Bengals play offensively. It's about who actually will get touches. As Andre said, Singletary should definitely score against this defense. We're going to talk about Singletary actually a little bit because there are concerns with him this week. But sticking with the Bengals for just a little bit minute longer, Zach Moss, to me, just doesn't feel like an appealing fantasy running back at this juncture. Going forward as well, because if anything, Chase Brown is seen to get the most touches when the Bengals run the football. So that's the reason why I don't feel very comfortable about him in this game. But going over to the Giants a little bit. As Andre said, Singletary could score, but I actually have him as someone to sit in this game. As Andre says, Chase Brown is amazing, and I agree with that sentiment completely. You can also start him if you so choose. I didn't mention him, but I feel like he could be a nice little sneaky start, maybe even as a flex option for you. But I'm actually thinking about sitting Devin Singletary, on the other hand, because he does have injury worries, and I feel like Tyrone Tracy is a very effective back for the Giants. He kind of came out of nowhere, but that sort of physicality could be highly coveted going forward for the Giants' game plans, because he puts a lot of pressure on opposing defenses to respect the run. And yes, it's not the prettiest style of running that he employs, but it gets the job done. He gets a lot of chunk yardage. He's very physical. You can't bring him down that often in the open field. And not for nothing, I feel like it also helps Daniel Jones a little bit. Because if you have a very explosive back who just utilizes speed, it's very similar to, trying to defend a speedy wide receiver, in my opinion. If you just have so much speed at one time, I feel like you kind of have to pick and choose your poison with how you play. So as much as I want Devin Singletary to succeed because he's had a rough start to his Giants career, I think it's going to be the Tyrone Tracy show in this game, if you want me to be honest. So if anyone who picked him up off waivers this past week wants to start him immediately, now is your opportunity, especially as Andre said, this defense. But who knows? You could be right, because any running back feels at any point they can score against this Bengals defense. But moving on to the starts. This is a weird one. This is the first time I've not picked a skill position player in this kind of segment, because it's the Giants defense I want to talk about as a start here. And I really think that even though I've sung the Bengals' praises on the offensive side of the football, there's a chance that they could stagnate should the Giants own the time of possession battle. The best defense is keeping your offense on the field. And yes, you have to see the Giants defense actually play. But I just feel like the frustration and tension, perhaps from not having the football for as long as they want, will settle in for the Bengals. And if they're so boom or bust in their big play style, then there's more opportunities for the Giants to exploit that. If have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, having shot plays, then that's really stagnates your offense. And so I kind of feel like the Giants defense has the advantage in this matchup, as long as their offense can also help them out a little bit. So look for the Giants defense to be a sneaky kind of option for you in this game. One other guy that I want to talk about as starting is Wan'Dale Robinson. This is a guy who kind of goes under the radar because Malik Neighbors is getting all the hype. But in all honesty, I feel like right now has the better traits to help Daniel Jones. We saw it a little bit in the Cowboys game, and we saw it a lot in the Seattle game. He's a fantastic route runner at every level of the field. He can put pressure on opposing corners. And he's really intelligent in how he runs his routes and how he helps Daniel Jones. Especially if you saw that touchdown against Seattle where he just got the leverage on the corner and Daniel Jones was able to layer his throw over the linebackers, over the corners, into the back corner of the end zone. So, Wan'Dale Robinson is such an intriguing wide receiver for the Giants to utilize outside of just Malik Neighbors. And it's going to be important that Daniel Jones acknowledges that, because it's not always going to be about Neighbors. People are going to figure out how to stop Neighbors eventually. But looking at Wan'Dale Robinson, you're looking at a really talented receiver that you can't ignore. So look for Wan'Dale Robinson to actually be the big fantasy receiver for the Giants this weekend. And then to talk about Neighbors a little bit, I feel that if you want to start him, you can, but I have him as a sit just because of that concussion injury and from what I'm hearing from the Giants camp about this injury. Because Brian Daboll did say that he's kind of at square one a little bit in terms of how he's moving through the phases of the concussion protocol. He was a limited I actually don't think he participated in practice, and I don't think he is I think he's a limited participant either yesterday or today's practice. So I don't think he's a question mark for the game. He certainly will play, I believe, but his snaps might be limited, his touches might be limited as a result. And not for nothing, I kind of feel like because the Giants saw what they could be without him, they're going to start to distribute the wealth a little bit in this offense. So some of his touches in the future might diminish as well. So this is kind of looking ahead and projecting what could happen with Malik Neighbors. Maybe he's not going to be as popular as people think. I still think very highly of him and what he can be in this Giants offense. But for this game, at the very least, with him coming off the injury and not looking as solid in practice as we had hoped, I feel like this is a potential sit for him. But let me know what you think in the comments about the situation. A lot of interesting storylines for fantasy prospects in this game. And that will just about do it for the show and this week of shows, specifically here in the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week, as always, at the same time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show if you do feel so inclined to keep up with more of our content here on the GSMC Sports Network. Also, if you would like to interact with the show more directly, as Andre has done a great example of showing you all, the Super Chats, Super Stickers, and Super Thanks features here on YouTube are a great way to contribute as well. I love hearing your guys' opinions. It keeps the show fresh. It keeps it fascinating to talk about. But without further ado, I've been Christopher Shepard. See you all on the other side next week. Take care, have a great weekend, but other than that, I am out.